A steel cable snaps at 300 miles per hour. A 40-ton jet slams onto a deck the size of 3 football fields every 60 seconds. And the man standing closest to all of it earns $9 a day in hazard pay. How does the most dangerous person on America's most lethal deck do a job so terrifying that even other flight deck crew won't go near it? Let's meet the one man you've never heard of who makes everything else possible. A pilot climbs into an FA-18 Super Hornet. He's wearing a $40,000 helmet. Beneath him, a $500,000 ejection seat is armed and ready. If everything goes wrong, that seat fires him clear of the aircraft in 0.25 seconds. He has a parachute, he has a survival radio, he has a rescue team on standby. The United States Navy has spent approximately $12 million training him. His name is in the newspapers. His face is on recruiting posters. Now look 3 meters in front of that aircraft. There's another man standing there. He's wearing a yellow jersey. He has foam earplugs, a cranial helmet, and a float coat. That's it. No ejection seat, no parachute, no $12 million training pipeline. If something goes wrong in the next 3 seconds, he has exactly one option: his own 2 legs. One man is called a hero. The other man, most Americans couldn't tell you his job title. His title is shooter, and what he does in those 3 seconds before that jet leaves the deck could mean the difference between a successful mission and a 40-ton fireball sliding to the Pacific Ocean. You've seen the footage: jets screaming off aircraft carriers, afterburners lighting up the night sky. It looks like the most powerful thing human beings have ever built, and it is the USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78 displaces 100,000 tons of steel. It carries 90 aircraft. It operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Its flight deck is 333 meters long and 77 meters wide, roughly 3 football fields laid end to end. But that number is misleading, because the actual launch area, the strip of deck where everything happens, where life and death are separated by a single hand signal, is far smaller than that. And in that strip, on any given day, you'll find approximately 200 sailors working within arm's reach of jet engines, screaming at 140 decibels. That's louder than a chainsaw pressed directly against your eardrum. Sustained exposure above 85 decibels causes permanent hearing damage. These sailors live at 140. The heat pouring from the exhaust nozzle of 2 General Electric F414-GE-400 engines reaches 900 degrees Fahrenheit at close range. The deck itself, painted with non-skid coating that tears through skin like sandpaper if you fall, sits 60 feet above water that, in the North Arabian Sea or the Western Pacific, runs cold enough to kill you within minutes of immersion. Every person on this deck wears a different colored jersey. Each color is a job. Each job is its own category of danger. Purple shirts handle jet fuel thousands of gallons of highly flammable JP5, pumping through lines pressurized at 50 psi, surrounded by hot engines and live ordnance. Red shirts load missiles and bombs onto aircraft. Blue shirts chain down 40-ton jets with their bare hands on a pitching or rolling surface. Green shirts, the hook runners, reset arresting cables by hand after every single landing. And then there are the yellow shirts, the directors, the orchestrators of controlled chaos. They guide aircraft movement using only hand signals, standing close enough to a spinning turbofan intake to be ingested in under a second if they misread the wind. Among yellow shirts, the shooter stands at the apex, the one closest to the jet, the one who makes the final call. Here's what most people don't know about the shooter. He's probably 24 to 28 years old. He grew up in a small town, Terre Haute, Indiana, Chillicothe, Ohio, Salina, Kansas. Not a military family, necessarily. Not a prodigy. Not someone who scored in the top percentile of any standardized test. He's someone who showed up, kept showing up, and let this deck turn him into something else entirely. To earn the right to stand at that position, he spent a minimum of 4 to 6 years working every subordinate yellow shirt role on the flight deck plane director, catapult safety observer, bow safety petty officer. There is no school that grants this qualification, no certificate program, no simulator that fully replicates it. The carrier itself is the only classroom that counts, and it teaches through repetition and near-death experience in roughly equal measure. The first time a new shooter stands at that position alone, no supervisor behind him, no safety net, just him and the nozzle of a running jet engine 3 meters away, the feeling is not pride. Every shooter who has talked about that moment describes the same thing: pure, unfiltered fear. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone, and they have approximately 3 seconds to swallow it before the launch sequence begins. Because the next aircraft in the cycle is already taxiing forward. The deck doesn't pause for anyone's psychology. After a full flight operations day in heavy seas, a carrier battle group operating in Sea State 4 with 8-foot swells, deck pitch of 3 to 5 degrees, a shooter's legs ache like he ran a marathon. Because for 8 to 12 continuous hours, every single step he took required his body to automatically compensate for a moving surface. That compensation burns muscle fuel constantly, invisibly, without rest. So the next time you see an F/A-18, Super Hornet light its afterburner and vanish off the bow of an aircraft carrier, remember the man in the yellow jersey who made it happen. The one standing 3 meters in front of where physics just unleashed 300 million joules. You probably don't know his name, but he knows exactly what he's doing. Do you think a 24-year-old from a small town in Indiana can carry the life or death responsibility of an entire flight squadron on his shoulders? Drop your answer in the comments right now. If this gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe. Over 95% of people watching right now haven't subscribed. It takes 1 second and it keeps these stories alive. But this is only the environment they live inside. What they actually have to do in 20 seconds, without a single tremor in their hands, without a single moment of hesitation, is what truly separates them from the rest of humanity. And that story is far more terrifying than anything you've seen so far. 20 seconds, that's the window. That's all of it. From the moment the previous aircraft clears the catapult track to the moment the next aircraft must be locked, checked, and ready to launch. 20 seconds in which a shooter must confirm the structural integrity of the catapult holdback bar, verify engine power settings through visual cockpit signals from the pilot, assess crosswind speed and direction against the launch weight of the aircraft, confirm blast deflector position, visually clear every human being from the danger zone, and make an irreversible binary decision: launch or don't launch. There is no third option. There is no pause button. There is no colleague to turn to and ask, does this look right to you? During cyclic flight operations, the standard operating rhythm of a carrier air wing at sea aircraft launch in intervals of 20 to 30 seconds. A typical recovery and launch cycle lasts 90 minutes. During that cycle, a shooter executes 15 to 20 individual launches over a full 24-hour operational period. That number climbs to over 100 launch events. Each one is independent, each one is final. Each one carries the same weight as the first. Let's slow those 20 seconds down. Because what happens inside a shooter's nervous system during that window is something no training manual has ever fully captured. The aircraft taxis forward into the catapult track. The nose gear launch bar drops into the shuttle groove. At that moment, the shooter steps to his position forward of the jet blast deflector, offset to the port side, close enough to read the expression behind the pilot's visor. The deck crew connects the holdback bar, the device that restrains the aircraft against full engine thrust until the precise moment of release. The shooter checks it, not with instruments, with his eyes and with 5 years of pattern recognition burned into his visual cortex. In the final 7 seconds, a shooter's brain simultaneously processes 6 to 7 distinct data streams: wind speed and direction from the ship's anemometer reading, engine status communicated through the pilot's thumbs up signal. Deck surface condition is that patch near the port edge wet from sea spray, status of all personnel within the catapult safety boundary, deck pitch and roll from physical sensation through his feet, catapult pressure settings relayed from the below deck operator, and the single most critical input of all the pilot's control surfaces: confirming full flight control sweep was completed.
No artificial intelligence system currently in operational deployment can integrate 6 simultaneous real-world sensor inputs of this type, adjust for environmental variables in real time, and produce a reliable binary launch or abort decision in under 7 seconds. The human nervous system, under specific training conditions and in peak physical state, still outperforms any existing autonomous alternative in this operational context.
The shooter is, in the most literal engineering sense, an irreplaceable component of the weapon system. Then comes the moment every shooter describes differently, but all describe the same way: the crouch. Before pressing the launch button, the shooter drops into a low crouch and sweeps his entire visual field one final time left to right, bow to stern, deck to sky. This movement is taught as a blast protection technique. If the jet blast deflector fails at the moment of launch, the crouch reduces the profile exposed to 900-degree exhaust. That's the technical explanation. But ask any shooter what that crouch actually means, and the answer is different. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb, a former shooter with 7 years of carrier operations across 3 deployments on USS Harry S. Truman, CVN-75, described it this way: "When I go down into that crouch, my head goes completely quiet.
Everything I've checked, I accept. Everything I can't control, I release. By the time I come back up and hit that button, there's nothing left in my mind except the green light in the pilot's hand." That is not a description of a technical procedure. That is a description of a psychological ritual, one that converts accumulated uncertainty into committed action in under 1 second. Now consider what happens when the sequence fails.
A cold cat shot a launch where the catapult delivers insufficient energy to achieve flying speed results in the aircraft, departing the bow of the carrier below minimum flying velocity. In most cases, the aircraft enters the water directly ahead of the ship. The carrier, traveling at 30 knots, reaches that position in approximately 30 seconds. Survival probability for the pilot is low. Survival probability for the aircraft is 0. In the event of a cold cat shot, the shooter is not relieved of duty. He is not walked off the deck. There is no grief counseling session between launches. The next aircraft in the sequence is already turning onto the catapult track. The shooter has approximately 3 minutes to reset, recheck, and be ready to execute again. His hands must be steady. His voice, if he communicates at all, must be controlled. His eyes must be clear. Psychologists who study extreme operational environments call this capacity operational dissociation, the brain's ability to partition traumatic or emotionally overwhelming events into a sealed compartment while the conscious mind continues functioning at full performance capacity. It is not suppression. It is not denial. It is a trained neurological response that, under sufficient stress load and insufficient recovery time, begins to degrade in ways the individual often cannot self-detect.
And here's the part the Navy's official documentation doesn't fully address. The shooter makes every one of these decisions entirely alone. There is no co-pilot. There is no second signature required. In the entirety of the United States military, there are very few enlisted positions below the rank of Chief Petty Officer that carry direct life or death authority over another human being in real time, with no confirmation protocol and no override mechanism. The shooter is one of them.
Operational dissociation, the brain sealing off trauma to keep functioning. Is that a strength or a wound? Where exactly is the line? Tell me what you think in the comments. But operational dissociation only holds when the brain is still sharp enough to maintain the partition. After 14 hours standing on a moving steel deck, what happens when that partition starts fracturing from the inside? In most cases, the aircraft enters the water directly ahead of the ship. The carrier, traveling at 30 knots, reaches that position in approximately 30 seconds. Survival probability for the pilot is low. Survival probability for the aircraft is 0. In the event of a cold cat shot, the shooter is not relieved of duty. He is not walked off the deck. There is no grief counseling session between launches. The next aircraft in the sequence is already turning onto the catapult track. The shooter has approximately 3 minutes to reset, recheck, and be ready to execute again. His hands must be steady. His voice, if he communicates at all, must be controlled. His eyes must be clear. Psychologists who study extreme operational environments call this capacity operational dissociation, the brain's ability to partition traumatic or emotionally overwhelming events into a sealed compartment while the conscious mind continues functioning at full performance capacity. It is not suppression, it is not denial. It is a trained neurological response that, under sufficient stress load and insufficient recovery time, begins to degrade in ways the individual often cannot self-detect.
And here's the part the Navy's official documentation doesn't fully address. The shooter makes every one of these decisions entirely alone. There is no co-pilot, there is no second signature required. In the entirety of the United States military, there are very few enlisted positions below the rank of Chief Petty Officer that carry direct life or death authority over another human being in real time, with no confirmation protocol and no override mechanism. The shooter is one of them.
Operational dissociation, the brain sealing off trauma to keep functioning. Is that a strength or a wound? Where exactly is the line? Tell me what you think in the comments. But operational dissociation only holds when the brain is still sharp enough to maintain the partition. After 14 hours standing on a moving steel deck, what happens when that partition starts fracturing from the inside? Here's what 16 hours on a carrier flight deck actually does to a human body. Not metaphorically, physiologically. A shooter working full flight operations burns approximately 3,800 to 4,200 calories per day, comparable to a competitive endurance athlete, except an endurance athlete gets to sit down. After a standard 7-month deployment, flight deck personnel in high-intensity positions lose an average of 4 to 7 kilograms of lean muscle mass. Not body fat, muscle.
The body begins consuming itself because the caloric deficit, the sleep debt, and the sustained physical load cannot be simultaneously managed by normal human metabolism over 210 consecutive days. The hearing damage is documented and permanent. Naval aviation medicine research found that flight deck personnel show measurable threshold shifts in the 3,000 to 6,000 hertz frequency range, even wearing dual hearing protection rated at a combined 52 decibel noise reduction.
The math still leaves approximately 88 decibels at the eardrum during peak operations. Over a full deployment, that accumulates. Most shooters who complete 3 deployments carry measurable permanent hearing loss by age 32. It doesn't show up on the recruiting poster. Then there is the sleep. Enlisted personnel at pay grades E1 through E4, the billets that feed the shooter qualification pipeline, are berthed in compartments adjacent to machinery spaces or directly below the catapult systems. Ambient noise in these spaces runs between 85 and 92 decibels continuously during flight operations. A 2018 study by the Naval Health Research Center in San Diego found that sailors in these berthing locations showed near total suppression of REM sleep after 60 consecutive days at sea, reduced to under 8 minutes per night on average. The clinical threshold for cognitive impairment from REM suppression is reached at 21 days. These sailors lived 210 days past that threshold.
The same study described resulting cognitive patterns consistent with mild traumatic brain injury, reduced processing speed, impaired working memory, decreased inhibitory control. These are precisely the functions a shooter relies on in the final 7 seconds before launch. Nobody mentions this at the pre-flight briefing. Now go back to July 29th, 1967, USS Forrestal, CV-59, Gulf of Tonkin, 60 miles off North Vietnam.
At 10:52 a.m., a stray voltage surge fires a 5-inch Zuni rocket from an F-4B Phantom II into the fuel tank of an A-4E Skyhawk on the flight deck. 400 gallons of JP-5 ignite in seconds. Within 90 seconds, the fire reaches a bomb load. The first 1,000-pound ANM-65 detonates. Then another, then another. 134 sailors died. 161 were injured. 21 aircraft destroyed. The fire burned for 13 hours.
In the first 30 minutes before organized damage control could function, individual flight deck crew members made decisions that appeared in no training manual. Yellow shirts, green shirts, plane captains, sailors with no orders and no visible chain of command began picking up unexploded ordnance by hand, 500-pound bombs with fuses already heated by surrounding fire. Live Zuni rocket pods and throwing them over the side. They knew what detonation at close range meant. They did it anyway.
Not because someone told them to, because the man next to them needed them to. That is not courage in any conventional sense. Courage implies calculation, weighing risk, and proceeding. What those men did had moved entirely past calculation into something behavioral scientists now call extreme prosocial behavior under mortal threat. Action taken to protect others at certain cost to oneself. Driven not by rational analysis, but by complete identity fusion with the group around them. By month 3 or 4 of deployment, naval flight surgeons begin documenting a specific pattern in flight deck personnel. The reflexes remain intact. The hands execute correct procedures in correct sequence. But the emotional presence has quietly withdrawn. The eyes carry a fixed middle distance focus during non-operational periods present in body, unreachable in mind. The body is on the deck. The person is somewhere else entirely. The mind has found the only way it knows to survive an environment it was never designed to inhabit for 210 consecutive days. Those young men on Forrestal's deck, no orders, no guarantees, live ordnance in their bare hands. You call that courage? Or is it something so much deeper we don't have a word for it yet? Tell me in the comments. After everything a body consuming itself, a brain running on fractured sleep, a mind retreating behind its own walls, why don't they quit? The answer isn't in any regulation manual. Science has only begun to understand it in the last decade, and it will change everything you think you know about why human beings do what they do for each other. The hazardous duty incentive paid for flight deck service, FDHDIP, amounts to $275 per month. That is $9.17 per day.
For standing 3 meters in front of a running jet engine at 2 in the morning and making a decision that determines whether another human being lives or dies. A shooter at pay grade, E5 earns roughly $3,400 per month in total compensation base pay, CPay, and hazardous duty combined. The FA-18E pilot he launches earns between $6,000 and $12,000, depending on rank. They work 3 meters apart. The financial gap between them is wider than the physical distance.
And the physical distance is already inside the blast radius. Nobody joins for the money. But duty and country are also incomplete explanations. Because under extreme conditions, human beings do not sacrifice their hearing, their sleep architecture, and their neurological health for abstractions. They do it for the specific person standing to their left, the one whose name they know, the one who pulled them back from a jet intake 6 weeks ago and never mentioned it again. In 1994, psychiatrist Dr. Jonathan Shea published research identifying what he called the central organizing principle of combat motivation, the deep attachment between individuals in small units that supersedes ideology, nationalism, and self-preservation instinct when sufficiently developed. His clinical work proposed this bond is not metaphorical. It is neurochemical. The supporting biology is now established.
A 2015 study from the University of Haifa examining combat unit cohesion confirms sustained elevation of oxytocin and vasopressin neurochemicals associated with maternal bonding and long-term pair attachment in individuals exposed to repeated shared danger alongside the same specific people. The brain, threatened repeatedly with the same individuals present, begins categorizing those individuals as neurologically equivalent to family.
The protective impulse a shooter feels when a crewmate is in danger is not chosen. It fires from the same ancient circuitry that drives a parent into traffic for a child. This is why they don't quit. Now here's the part that never appears in any recruiting material. A 2019 study across Veterans Affairs medical centers found that enlisted flight deck personnel showed rates of sub-threshold PTSD trauma symptoms present, but below diagnostic threshold, 23% higher than matched Navy controls who had not served in flight deck billets. These sailors were not having nightmares about combat. They were having nightmares about red launch lights, about the sound of an F414 engine at full military power, about reaching for a crewmate's harness and closing their hand on empty air. Most were never diagnosed because they never identify what they experience as trauma. Trauma requires an enemy. What they had was a job. The first year home is the hardest, not because of the trauma, because of the silence. A brain calibrated for 7 months inside 140 decibel controlled chaos, processing life or death decisions every 30 seconds, does not simply reset when the orders end.
The quiet of a residential street at 8 a.m. feels wrong, in a way impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. Multiple former shooters in separate documented accounts describe sitting in their own living room in complete safety, feeling a sourceless low-level panic they cannot locate or name. Their nervous system was built for the deck, and the deck is gone. The aircraft carrier is the most powerful conventional military instrument ever constructed. When USS Gerald R.
Ford CVN-78 enters a contested region, the message it sends cannot be replicated diplomatically, but that message is not carried by the reactors or the steel of the aircraft. It is carried by the 4,500 people who operate it. By the shooter in the yellow jersey, 25 years old, $9.17 in hazardous duty pay, last meaningful sleep 4 days ago, crouching into the blast one more time and pressing the button. He doesn't get the headline, he doesn't get the photograph. He gets back into position for the next one. If you were that shooter 25 years old, $9 a day, 3 meters from a jet engine at 2 a.m. in the middle of the Pacific, would you take the job? And more importantly, why? Leave your real answer in the comments. If this story changed how you see the people behind America's military power, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to understand what service actually looks like. These people exist. These stories are real, and almost no one is telling them